Hey, Sleepy Sheepy here. Today we're going to be looking at a level 90 Dexterity build using the Clinging Bone Fist Weapon. We'll be putting 40 points into Vigor, 28 into Endurance, and then 43 into Dexterity. However, we have a couple different things boosting our Dexterity, and then 16 into Arcane, which is required for this weapon. So we have the Okina Mask, which gives us 3 points, and then we also have Millicent's Prosthesis, which gives us another 5. One thing to note about the Okina Mask is that it greatly lowers your focus, so to combat that, we're going to be switching over to the Clarifying Horn Charm to raise our focus anytime we see either sleep or madness. We're going to be using the Tree Sentinel Armor, Bullgoat Gauntlets, and Bullgoat Greaves to give us 83 poise, and we'll also use the Spear Talisman, Claw Talisman, Millicent's Prosthesis, and Urchi's Favor +2. We'll be taking advantage of the Spear Talisman because this weapon does pierce damage for both the jumping heavy attack and the running light attack, so that's going to be pretty useful in a lot of different circumstances. We'll be further boosting our Dexterity using the Dexterity Not Crystal tier as well as the Crimson Bubble tier. I found those two to be optimal, but you could definitely switch it up. The Spiky Crack tier might be a good option since successive attacks are pretty common with this moveset. I definitely want to talk about the moveset for this weapon because it is probably one of the most off-meta weapons you can use. It's a fist weapon, which is already kind of off meta, but then it's also Somber Smithing, which means that you can't change the Ash of War, and the default Ash of War is going to be Lifesteal Fist, which is definitely not a very good Ash of War. So between those two things, it's not great. You also have a requirement of 16 for Arcane, but you don't get really much scaling with Arcane, so it's not good for that, and you can't put any greases or anything on it either. So there's a couple things kind of playing against the utility of this, but what we can take advantage of the fact that it has pierce damage. So the jumping heavy attacks are going to be pierce damage, and then the running light attacks are also going to be pierce damage. And those two things together can be really useful with the Claw Talisman as well as the Spear Talisman. I found that Millicent's Prosthesis was particularly useful as well because it also raises Dexterity, and when you go for lots of continuous light attacks, you're not getting the pierce damage that you might normally, but you will be getting an AR boost as you land those successive attacks. And this also pairs nicely with Iron Jar Aromatic, which I've used in some other fist weapon builds, so I didn't rely on that too heavily throughout this showcase, but it's definitely an option to kind of maximize successive attacks. That pretty much covers everything that I wanted to say about the moveset, the build, and kind of the reasons why this is not a meta-style build. As you know, I am trying to get to 1,000 subscribers, so if you wouldn't mind considering subscribing if you haven't already, definitely appreciate that. But yeah, let's just go ahead and jump into the invasions. Alright, so jumping into our first invasion, we have a 2v1 that involves some Rivers of Blood as well as Taker's Flame, and then we'll also have a Phantom pulling out Eleanor's Pole Blade a little bit later on. But this is a good example of just why stamina is so important when you're using fist weapons and stamina management in general, because the tendency is to sprint after your opponent because it's very difficult to kind of get up close and personal if you're just kind of walking at them, which is a little bit more doable when you have a longer range weapon. And I will definitely mismanage my stamina a couple times throughout the course of this invasion, and as a result get hit by Taker's Flame, which I, was pressing B to roll for, but because I was out of stamina, you can't move. So that's just something to keep an eye out for, especially when running fist weapon builds, is that you'll be frequently going for chase down type situations and be burning through stamina rather than kind of rebuilding it in some of the neutral moments or the chase down moments. So that's just something to be aware of, and something in general that I've found as kind of an issue for the fist weapon play style, something that makes it a little bit more difficult. But that said, with this weapon class, you definitely get some pretty strong attacks that can come out. This weapon in general is not amazing in terms of damage output, but with the Claw Talisman, Millicent's Prosthesis, and the pierce damage plus the Spear Talisman, you do have the ability to at least get some kills and output some pretty good damage. So here we can see the Phantoms going for Eleanor's Pole Blade, which really just kind of locks them into an animation for a while, and then I go for a poise trade using some neutral attacks, which I found to be pretty useful. The neutral attacks on this can kind of catch people off guard if you just stand in one place, as long as you don't do it too often. So I was a little bit tilted after the number of Taker's Flames that this guy used, so I went for Lifesteal Fist as an Estus Punish, and that ended up working out. And then this definitely wasn't necessary, but I switched over to a Parry Shield and decided I wanted to go for a parry attempt and then a riposte with the Misericordia. So Definitely not necessary to use a parry shield on this build, but it is a nice way to incorporate crits as well as just kind of change up your attacks a little bit, since you'll be going for a lot of running lights and jumping heavies with this particular build. Some neutral light attacks are going to be good, and the occasional running heavy is going to be good, but for the most part, you're really trying to take advantage of those attacks that have the pierce damage, which are the running lights and jumping heavies. So next up we have a 2v1, and I like this one. They waved before the invasion started, and it was just kind of like a, I don't know, honest invasion where everybody was just using regular weapons, and somebody had an axe and a shield, which you don't really see too much, and it was just a fairly solid duo, I thought. I'm able to take care of the first phantom, but you also see that I'm kind of respecting the frostbite damage that my opponent can do, and I also was throwing some freezing pots as well, just to in the hopes that I'd land them and get that 20% bonus to the damage they receive. So I definitely found that to be a useful tactic as well, to get them frostbitten, especially since this weapon can't be imbued with anything, or you can't use any greases with it. So having some sort of status proc to just kind of take care of some damage and then have the benefit of the extra damage for subsequent hits is pretty nice. So eventually I do go for a running light attack, and that's enough to guard break them, and I get the riposte. So just kind of a instance where nobody was running anything too powerful, and this build was just kind of enough to take care of those two setups without too much difficulty, which was nice. Next up we have something a little bit more meta, which is going to be somebody with Vike Spear and Moonveil. I don't think that I swapped over to the talisman that raises focus, although I probably should have at the beginning of this invasion, but I'm able to kind of get a guard break and some help from the PvE to take care of the Madness Spear pretty early on. The player with the Radon Helm and Moonveil is definitely using their shield a little bit too much. I think that they're opening themselves up for kicks, so I go for a parry attempt first, just because I feel like this player is kind of on the back foot and it would be good practice. And then I meant to go for a kick there in that instance, but I still had my parry shield active, so that didn't work out. So instead I go for lifesteal fist. Not really my favorite Ash of War name, to be honest, but I managed to land that through the shield. So my understanding is that occasionally you won't do enough poise damage to land that attack, but if you do have enough poise damage, or you've been kind of chipping away at their poise and stamina, you will be able to land it through shields. So I don't think you're guaranteed to land it through shields like you are with something like Inescapable Frenzy, but just something to be aware of, and if you see smaller shields, you'll probably be in a better spot to land the Lifesteal Fist. Next up we have an invasion with similar builds, actually. Somebody with a Vike Spear and then a host with Radon's Helm. And this was an instance where I really needed to kind of pay attention to the different statuses that we're building up. So we have Bleed coming from the host, we have Poison just because of where we are, and then we have Vike Spear delivering some madness. So I had already equipped the talisman that raises my focus, so you see that my focus bar is going to be much higher to deal with the madness, and that definitely was pretty helpful. Also, when you're invading in a place like this, I think it can be tempting to not roll so you don't get the continuous poison buildup. But unless you're going to be switching to a weapon with Bloodhound Step or Quick Step, I think it's much better to just roll and take the chip damage and try to use the different boluses when you have an opportunity. That was not a great opportunity, but I went for it anyway. And that way you're not going to get hit and get chunked and stun locked, and you'll just kind of dodge like you normally would, and then just be aware that you're probably going to be poisoned. So eventually I am able to chip down the user with Vike Spear and kind of reset things back to neutral. And once things are neutral, it's not so bad. I try to get rid of the poison buildup now because I feel like there's a little bit more time and space to do so, and then the chase down on the host just begins, who's kind of spamming their attacks. I definitely could have just continuously spammed my attack and killed them there, but felt like they were a good candidate for a parry, so for a parry and a riposte. Definitely not necessary, but I am practicing that more and more these days, so I felt like this build was one that lent itself to using a parry shield, and we had the weight load for it. So I did that, and then I just re-equipped my claw talisman so I could kind of get that back. So if you didn't notice, the audio has just cut out for the invasion, and I'm hopefully going to put some music on top of that. For the clips following this one, they'll all have no audio from the game itself. I had some technical issues, but this shouldn't be an issue again in the future. I didn't want to kind of throw away all my clips just because of that, so the music will hopefully work with the voiceover. But in this clip, I go for a Iron Jar aromatic because they really have nowhere to go, and I just thought that this would be a good opportunity for it, and it ended up working out in my favor. I think it's a little bit difficult when you're surrounded by 3 people to kind of see who exactly you're hitting when in terms of like the host or the phantoms. So I did kill the host pretty early there, but I also got the phantom and then most of the HP off the other phantom, so I thought it worked out all right. This next invasion was not my favorite. There's quite a lot of waves of gold spam coming my way, and somehow I was able to roll a lot of it. That's usually not my experience with waves of gold. I find that it frequently desyncs in such a way that it looks like you roll it and then you don't, and I'm sure most of you know what I'm talking about. But this duo that just kind of hung out at the first step area spamming waves of gold and magic definitely rubbed me the wrong way, so I was pretty determined to just kind of stick with it, and if I could beat them with clinging bone, that was gonna be kind of nice. So I definitely tried to pick my moments, avoid the waves of gold as much as possible, and then just keep on the phantom here and at least get some chip damage. If I could get the counter damage associated with the spear talisman, that would be great, but it definitely wasn't always possible. Here they run out of FP, which definitely puts them on their back foot because they don't really have any aspect of their build to use any melee attacks or anything that doesn't require FP, so I was able to chase them down a little bit and then get that counter damage attack with a jumping attack while they were casting their spell, and that was enough to do 800 some damage, as well as put them on the back foot where they were running away, where I could chase them down. So here I kind of wanted to bad manners this person, so I pull out my parry shield. I don't manage to get this parry coming up in just a second here, and I was going to go for the weapon swap, but no dice there, so I switch back to the dual fist weapon setup, and then there I was going to go for an Estus punish, but it turns out they were out of Estus, which does make sense because they seem to have committed a lot of their flasks to FP for all those waves of gold. So ended up working out there, and I was able to kind of win out on a situation where I was pretty much expecting to lose, just given the number of waves of gold and the desyncing issues for that. Personally, I would love to see that really just nerfed into the ground or have the desyncing issue fixed. The fact that it's very strong and does not usually line up in its position when you're playing against it just makes it pretty rough to play against. This next one was just a quick 2v1 where we had a really aggressive player using the dual thrusting sword setup, and I find that the dual thrusting sword setup really lends itself to aggressive play that's pretty punishable. So I ended up in a good spot there and was able to then parry the host. So next up we have 2v1. I tried to announce myself, but the Phantom didn't really seem that interested in taking me on as a threat, so I land a jumping attack, which does a decent amount of health. And then here I'm really impressed by their kind of boldness to play with low health. They kind of stuck with it and didn't really back off for a while, and we both just kind of missed some jumping attacks, and that was interesting to me. I was kind of expecting them to back off and go for a chase down, but I think it ended up working out in their favor because I wasn't kind of chasing them down, and we both had similar amounts of health. So probably the right move there, but here they really continue to play with low health, and that's where I think the issues start to show with their playstyle. So earlier I think it wasn't a bad move when it was pretty evenly matched in terms of how much health we both had, but once I was doing a little bit better with health, it definitely opened them up to some more attacks. So here I just kind of finish off this Radon Helm user with a quick parry and then a weapon swap, and then swap back to my fist weapon to grab the last bit of HP. And yeah, just a lot more crits in this particular invasion due to the weapon we're using, but I tried to keep them to a minimum while it was a 2v1. It was mostly just kind of a quick way to finish, because finishing this with this weapon could be a little bit slow. Especially if your opponent kind of gets the timing down. Running light attacks and jumping heavies are both very reactable and really do best when you're facing aggressive play. So next up we have a 2v1, and this player is light rolling, which is a great counter to this particular weapon class. Being able to roll out so far away really can kind of take away your ability to land anything, but I'm not sure what happened with their timing. They ended up not rolling when they should have, and I landed a jumping attack. So that was kind of a quick, easy way to do that. And then now I am realizing just the number of parries that I went for in the showcase. So we do have another parry just against Moonveil. So I do stand by the belief that you don't need to parry as often as I did to use this weapon, just based on the fact that I was able to get a decent number of kills with it against phantoms without parrying. But when it is down to the host, I think I was just kind of going for a little bit more practice on this build because it's been a while. So I hope y'all don't mind and don't find it to be like kind of a cop-out in terms of using this somewhat of a mean weapon, but we do have a lot of kills with it just on phantoms. So here we do have a pretty decent 2v1. We have a phantom using Phantom Slash, which is really strong and kind of weird. So there's a lot of different things you can do with it. One is that you can get stun locked out of the animation, but the phantom will continue because you don't stun lock the phantom. So I didn't necessarily find that to be too much of an issue. I definitely lost some HP in the process of that, but I do kind of like that element of that particular Ash of War. I think it makes it pretty interesting. Another thing is you can send the phantom out in the opposite direction that you are, so you can send the phantom forward and then do your slash backwards, and that can be a very strong way to just kind of be aggressive without much risk. But eventually they do kind of use Phantom Slash one too many times and end up just kind of getting jump attacked and strafed around effectively. So here I do end up going for backstab on the Bloodhound Fang Ash of War. If you've seen my content, I find that to be a very good opportunity for backstabs, and especially just with the commonality of this particular weapon, it's an easy one to practice the timing for. So here we do get the 43 HP backstab on that as well, and you know, definitely call that one a W. So next up we have a 2v1, and this is another kind of common setup you might find while invading, just Rivers of Blood and Bloodhound Fang. I found Rivers of Blood to be a really nice weapon to face when using this build because it was so easy to get counter damage hits, just because they are stuck in the Rivers of Blood animation if they go for multiple parts of it. And then Bloodhound Fang, as I said, is just great for backstab. So we do manage to land that there, and we begin the chase down process, but the environmental awareness of the host is slightly problematic, and they end up rolling off the edge. But definitely a build like this is useful against Rivers of Blood. This is almost just like the C-list version of the Qatar weapon, where you do get a little bit more range, but you don't get good scaling or anything. And it's very strong to set it up with the Claw Talisman as well as the Sphere Talisman. And next up we have just a one-on-one. We have a dual straight swords user, but they weren't really... I don't know, it wasn't too meta in their approach. They had Square Off as their Ash of War, which I think is pretty cool and just not something you see too much. And here they almost get me, but kind of stay aggressive, and the quickness of the fist weapon just comes out a little bit faster than I think they were expecting. I'm able to get their last bit of HP. Next up we have a 2v1 with a little bit of elevator shenanigans. So I saw that they were coming up this elevator that was pretty far down. So I went ahead and dropped a couple of volcano pots. They're probably not the right pots to use, but they were the only roped pots that I had, since their animation does stay in the same place of where they land while the elevator continues to go up. So using something like lightning pots would have been a little bit better, but that's what I had, so that's what I used, and might have done a little chip damage, not totally sure. And both these players are poisoned. It just kind of goes to show how little people like appreciate the chip damage that comes with poison. You'll frequently see people just not do anything about it, and it's definitely a factor, especially over time. So if you have time and space to use a Bolus, you absolutely should. They're not the most fun to farm, but you know, I think they really are helpful in situations where you need all the HP you can get, which would be this instance for these players. So we do have a Phantom that does die with the help of some PvE, and then the Moonlight Greatsword user is just kind of swinging away pretty aggressively. But once it's a one-on-one situation, I'm not too worried because I don't have to worry about the pressure of the Phantom. So that ended up working out pretty well, and definitely it was nice to have a little PvE help. I feel like that's more and more rare these days. So this invasion, I pretty much just showed how I wanted to show because of how much damage I was able to get with these weapons. So I just hit for over 700. I'm not sure if they've got seals on or what, but it was a jumping counterattack. So as memey as this weapon class and these weapons are, they do have the potential to deliver some high damage output. And you will note that I did frostbite my opponents beforehand, so I am getting a bonus there. So I wouldn't expect you to regularly land something that's like 800 or 900 damage with the jumping attack, but it does have potential to do quite a bit of damage, especially if you get a frostbite proc and you know, land a counter damage jumping attack. But moving on, we have a 2v1, and this one I also go for the frostbite proc pretty early in the fight. I definitely like that as kind of an introductory attack. It's a good way to, you know, kind of put people off on their back foot, and I'm, you know, frostbitten pretty early, so I kind of want to back off here. And then we do have these rings of light that I find particularly frustrating, especially when they're spammed, just because they can do a lot of damage, and because they go forwards and backwards, they just kind of compound over time. So I back off there at first, and then just try to stay really aggressive once they're using those again, and I'm able to get a jumping attack, which does a decent amount of damage, and then finish off the Phantom there. And then I'm just kind of quickly able to chase down the host, and I think they might have been going for some weapon swaps or something, but definitely wasn't going to work out. So here we have somebody being a little bit of a Chad, just hanging out on the step here, which really opens them up to jar cannon attacks. I was hoping it would knock them off the stairs as well and completely down. I feel like there's something that's changed recently about, or maybe not that recently, but just how jar cannons work in terms of where it knocks people. I feel like you're less likely to knock people off ledges. But that might just be me. If you do have an opinion about this, let me know in the comments. But it seems like the explosion will more frequently push people back onto a ledge and not over one. So kind of interesting thing to note there, but it might just totally be in my head. At this point, I'm realizing that this is a pretty bad setup to be facing. We have somebody that does a lot of damage with their spells, and had I not ran down the stairs and kind of gotten out of the line of fire of them, I definitely would have died. And that player is light rolling, so I start trying to give myself a little bit more space by using a volcano pot, which just kind of discourages them from coming down this hallway. And then I switch back over to the freezing pot just so I can get the frostbite proc, which will allow me to output a little bit more damage on this player. And here I go for a kick attack, which does end up working out. I'm able to get the riposte just with the quick weapon swap. But we do have a player using the spinning weapon, Ash of War, which can be very strong and is pretty dangerous, especially in tight quarters. So I don't want to mess with it too much and end up just killing the host first. Definitely would have preferred not to, but sometimes that's just kind of the way that it goes. Next up we have well, it starts as a 1v1 with kind of a player with an interesting build. They have kind of weird armor, and I think they're using Cragblade on one of the spears. And they are using a dual spear setup just in general, which can be extremely strong. A good counter to a dual spear setup is going to be jumping attacks, and then you'll always want to roll into your opponent, just because the hitbox for spears has a lot of forward momentum, and so if you can roll into your opponent, it'll frequently bring the hitbox behind you, and you'll dodge the damage. You really don't want to be continuously backing away from a player with dual spears, so you know, forward jumps and forward rolls into your opponent are both going to be pretty useful. So here I'm just trying to find openings to get some attacks in on the Phantom. They are using the Moonlight Greatsword, which can deliver a lot of damage, and the projectile is definitely something to worry about, but they're not using it super effectively, and sometimes the host is backing off, which gives me opportunities to get some damage kind of input. I'm not sure why the host really backed off there. I was also trying to just move around the map a little bit, and if possible, having PvE get involved would be pretty good. I also do see that the player with the dual spheres is trying to kind of wave dash a little bit, which I don't know, it seems a little bit odd, their frequency of it. It doesn't just seem to be stamina regeneration. It seems a little bit more common than that. So I'm not sure if they were practicing some new stuff or what, but I'm not sure it was super effective. It also gave me some insight into just their general skill level. It seemed like they were aware of some more common just kind of PvP tactics, but maybe not amazing at implementing them all the time or kind of in the process of learning them. So that's definitely good information to have. Somebody that's aware of PvP tactics and just PvP kind of play styles in general are going to be less likely to parry or something. They're going to be more aware of your play style and what works for you, and it's just kind of probably a good idea to respect them a little bit. So there they do give me kind of like a rallying cry fist bump type thing, which is kind of funny. I do respect that. I think they were happy to see me get a kill with the clinging bone weapon. And here I go for boiled crab. Definitely not necessary. I don't use those consumables too often, but they can be nice, especially if you have a long drawn out fight like this one where you're really going for a lot of trades and both trying to chip each other, and especially if they do have physical damage that they're going for. So I opted to do that. It's definitely not necessary, but for longer fights it can be useful, especially if you have the time and the space to use them. If your opponent's backing away, I'd say it's always in your best interest to try to use that extra space to your advantage. So whether you're using a buff or consumable, putting on talisman so you can get regen going, just trying to punish everything your opponent does is going to be helpful in the long run. So there they go for a Barbaric Roar heavy attack, which is pretty cool. It didn't do a ton of damage, but I do like that they went for that. It's definitely one of the more interesting Ashes of War, and especially something like that on a halberd is just something that can absolutely one-shot you if it's on the right setup. So we do have a blue that came into the world that's getting involved with some PvE somewhat unsuccessfully, so I try to start making my way over to that player, and I want to get the extra heals that they will bring if they die, so that'll be 2 Crimson Flasks, which would be great. And there they try to take on some of the PvE, but are really more optimized for PvP with their Vike Spear, and don't appreciate that they're not going to poise break their opponents automatically. So that ends up being pretty useful in terms of allowing me to get some extra health and just continue this fight against this dual spear user. And you will notice that I am playing fairly defensively. When you have a weapon like mine and you're going up against dual spears, I think you're more likely to lose out on trades, get stun locked. So really choosing your opportunities to go for attacks is going to be pretty important. And here I am able to land a jump attack, which gets them on their back foot, and they go for a little bit more aggressive play because they are cornered, which isn't necessarily a bad idea, but here I think they should have really tried to focus more on getting away, because now they're down to like 2 HP, and I'm able to toss a fan dagger and finish them off. With the knowledge that they were going to be bringing more blues into the world potentially, I felt like it was probably in my best interest to just use a fan dagger. Obviously, I'd always prefer to hit them with my actual weapon than use a projectile like that, but sometimes it just kind of calls for it. This last one is going to be kind of a silly invasion. This was actually the first invasion on this build, which is just a one-on-one, and you can see that some of the armor and stuff is different. But overall, just kind of take this as an opportunity to talk about this as a whole. I don't think it was as bad as I was expecting it to. Having the pierce damage option definitely helps. Using some talismans and some equipment to boost your dexterity definitely helps. And at this level, you definitely find enough people that are kind of of the skill level where you'll stand a chance against them. Like, we did have some instances where somebody was just kind of spamming waves of gold. We definitely saw players with Moonveil and Vike Spear, so it wasn't just players that were really using like bad weapons and had no knowledge of how to kind of, I don't know, counter PvP in general. But you know, this is not meta for a reason. It has kind of a one-ish dimensional moveset. The jumping attacks and light attacks are going to be really common to use. So I don't think this will ever be meta, but I definitely had fun with it, and I hope you did too. As always, if you made it this far, I just wanted to say thanks so much for watching. I was looking at my analytics recently, and only about 6% of viewers do make it to the end of the video. So for those that do stick with the entire thing and like contribute to watch time and hopefully enjoy the entire thing as content, I just wanted to say that I really do appreciate it. And I know there's not a ton of you out there, but for those that do, it's really helpful, and it really, you know, means a lot to me. So yeah, that's all I got, and I hope you have a good one.